Hello, my name is Scott Anderson, President and CEO of Zions Bank, and it's my honor to welcome all of you to our Zions Community Speaker Series celebrating Women's History Month. This year, Zions celebrates 150 years in business, and in honor of this significant milestone in our history, today's Community Speaker Series will center around the theme, Honoring Women's History, Investing in Our Future. Women have played a significant role in our history and in building and growing our organization since inception. The day Zions Bank opened its doors for business on October 1st, 1873, 5 of the first 15 depositors were women, and another was a women's organization. This was an executive business decision by bank management that was made to accept women opening their own accounts under their own names, when most banks didn't allow women to open up their own accounts without a man's signature. And since then, we have continued to strive to open doors of opportunity and to give women the access to capital they needed to grow their businesses and advance in their careers. In 2020, we commissioned the artist Jan Haworth, known for creating the Beatles' Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Heart Club album cover, to create a mural celebrating women in Utah in commemoration of the 100th anniversary of the passing of the 19th Amendment, giving women the right to vote, and the 150th anniversary of the first woman in the country to vote in a municipal election, a Utahn, Miss Sarah Young, a grandniece of Brigham Young and a school teacher. Jan's mural features 250 women, past and present, famous and not, who have helped and continue to help Utah grow and thrive. However, these women represent all women in Utah and all of the achievements done by women in building our state. I invite each of you to visit this historic work of art in downtown Salt Lake City. The mural is hanging on the east side of our 6-story Dinwiddie building on First South between Main Street and West Temple. There is a guide at the base of the mural identifying the women pictured and giving their history. But again, since we could not include all women in the mural, those pictured represent every single woman, past and present. And in fact, if you look at the mural, there are several figures of women with blank faces, and they were left blank on purpose so that you, as you looked at the mural, could insert a woman's face of virtue whom you think should be there and be honored. Today's program is made up of an outstanding group of women, and I am so glad that they would be here with us today. We will feature Tiffany Green, Education and Outreach Director for Better Days, Rebecca Shavitz-Hoke, former Utah State Representative for House District 24, Camus Smith, co-directors of SISTA in Zion, Robin Rich, a tech executive who most recently served as president of the Desert News and Utah Business, Madison Lemansky, Chief Operating Officer of She Place and She Money, and Sergeant Schwan D. Moses, Master Sergeant in the U.S. Air Force, currently serving as A-1 Deputy Director of the 366th Fighter Wing at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Mountain Home, Idaho, and the founder and CEO of the Craft Sergeant LLC. We are honored to hear from such an accomplished panel of women leaders who are dedicated to opening opportunity for all women. I want to thank our One Zions team who's responsible for organizing and producing today's event. And I want to thank again our guest speakers for taking their time to share their stories and the stories of other women who have made our history possible and who continue to make history in the communities we serve. And I want to thank all of you in the audience for joining us today to celebrate Women's History Month. Building a culture of equality for women begins with us. It begins with me, and it begins with you. So with no further ado, I'd like to turn the time over to Sulang Pinoke, our Senior Vice President of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, who will introduce our guests and moderate today's conversation. Sulang.
Thank you, Scott, for that warm welcome. And thank you for the background information about the Utah Women 2020 mural that really spoke to me. And I think it will to our audience as well. And every time I hear the story of how 5 of the first 15 depositors at Zions Bank were women back in 1873, I want to shout it from the rooftops. That is such exciting news to me. And as Scott mentioned, Zions Bank celebrates 150 years in business this year, a truly remarkable feat. And in honor of this significant milestone in our institution's history, we'll be using this platform to showcase the stories of community leaders and organizations across our footprint. Thank you for choosing to celebrate women's history with us. We are honored to hear from such dedicated women leaders in today's community speaker series, honoring women's history, investing in our future. With no further ado, I would like to introduce our community speakers. Please join me in welcoming Tiffany Green, Education and Outreach Director for Better Days; Robin Rich, former President, Deseret News and Utah Business; Tamu Smith, co-founder of Sistas in Zion; Madison Lemansky, Chief Operating Officer of She Place and She Money; and Master Sergeant Shawan Moses, Master Sergeant in the United States Air Force, representing Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, and founder and CEO of the Craft Sergeant LLC. Unfortunately, our dear friend and colleague Rebecca Chavez Hope will be unable to join us today, but we will acknowledge her later on in today's program. Now, I want to thank each of our guests for joining us today. We are so excited to hear from each of you and learn about your perspectives and experiences related to women's history. And we are going to start the conversation with education. Scott mentioned the Utah Women 2020 mural. So I'm going to invite Jared to pull up an image of the mural while I provide a brief snapshot of Utah's history leading up to the Utah Women 2020 reveal. The bank is older than the state of Utah. Brigham Young settled in the valley of the Great Salt Lake in 1847. He founded Zions Bank in 1873. And Utah became the 45th state in 1896. 24 years later, the 19th Amendment's adoption was certified on August 26, 1920. Fast forward 100 years, and the Utah Women 2020 mural was revealed in honor of the 19th Amendment's centennial celebration. Now, I can't think of a better leader and organization to educate us on women's history in our community than Tiffany Green, Education and Outreach Director for Better Days. Better Days is a local nonprofit organization that played an integral role in the community effort to bring the Utah Women 2020 mural into fruition. Tiffany brings a wealth of knowledge in women's history in our community, so I'm just going to turn the time to her to lay the foundation of where we started and how far we've come. Tiffany.
Thank you, Sue Lang. It's a pleasure to be here. The organization I work for, Better Days, is a Utah Women's History nonprofit that's dedicated to sharing stories of Utah women in the past in order to improve the lives of Utah women in the present and in the future. So I'm happy to be here and join this excellent panel of speakers and share just a small slice of history with you all today. I don't consider it to be the definitive history of women in Utah or in the West, but rather just an important part of the history of women in the West. In the second half of the 19th century, so we're talking 1800s here, a particular variety of women's rights expansion took hold in the Intermountain West, influenced by lots of national and local factors that really converged to create this climate that produced a lot of legal independence and individual wealth for some women that went well beyond what was even possible in many other areas of our country. This expansion of women's rights was not linear, meaning it wasn't this progressive improvement with each passing year or each passing decade. As women were able to advocate for certain doors to be open to them and their communities, other doors remained tightly closed. Or in some cases, for certain groups of women, those doors were virtually non-existent for many, many decades. This expansion and contraction simultaneously of women's rights is the through line of the story I think we're trying to tell with this panel today, and what I think Zions Bank was trying to encapsulate with their 2020 Women's Mural. So by the time Zions Savings Bank and Trust, that was the name of Zions Bank way back in 1873, when they opened their doors, they had bylaws like most organizations do. And section 22 of their bylaws stated, all deposits made by minors or by married women shall be fully under their control, payable to them on their own receipt without regard to any guardian or husband. President Anderson mentioned that 5 of the first 15 account holders were women. And indeed, after personally looking over those account books, I can say that there was a reality that many hundreds of women all along the Wasatch Front were opening up their own bank accounts at that time, managing their own funds outside of any regulatory control of male guardians or husbands in their lives. This financial independence was one piece of quite a few opportunities that were available to women in Utah particularly, and in the Intermountain region generally. Women had the right to own and sell property. They could have a will written for themselves. They could sue and be sued. And this recognition of women's real, meaning like land assets and personal assets, meant that women had this legal identity in their own right. And some women in Utah and Wyoming also had officially recognized political identities and independence. The legislatures in both Wyoming and Utah had passed equal suffrage laws granting female citizens the right to vote in 1869 and 1870, respectively, with Utah being the first to actually vote and Utah women being the first to vote in an election on Valentine's Day in 1870. I will note that the time period I'm talking about is right on the heels of the Civil War and during the time that we now know as Reconstruction. So for Black American women specifically, their access to this recognition of legal and political identities is an important part of the expansion and contraction that I'm talking about, as well as for Indigenous women, immigrant women from countries outside of Northwestern Europe, including many women from the Pacific Islands who would come to Utah at the close of the 19th century. So they were also a part of this national and local conversation in important ways, from top down and bottom up, in ways that we don't have time to cover in this short panel today, but remember that as we're talking about all of this today. For women living in Utah, by 1887, so 17 years after they had been voting, the United States Congress revoked all female voting rights across the board. A group of Utah women responded to this contraction of their voting rights by forming suffrage organizations to advocate to reinstate their female franchise, which is the right to vote. Similarly, groups in Idaho also started organizing these suffrage organizations with the expectation that their right to vote would ultimately be recognized for the first time, because women in Idaho up until that point hadn't been able to vote. These efforts in Utah were led by women like Emmeline Wells, and I think they're going to pull up a picture of Emmeline from the mural. She was a key leader in this grassroots territory-wide movement that really was organized, run, and completely funded by Utah women. Emmeline Wells, who coincidentally has 2 granddaughters who were among the 5 female account holders that President Anderson referenced earlier. That's just like a little side note. She was Utah's premier suffragist. She edited the Women's Exponent, which was the longest running suffrage newspaper in our country. She spoke to nationwide audiences about how Utah women were voting, and guess what? The sky was not falling when women were participating in this political process. And for a lot of people around the nation, there were some real fears that having women enter into that public sphere was going to be really detrimental. And so women in Utah, like Emmeline, could speak to how it actually was a good thing and it was beneficial to all Utahns to have women participate in the political process. It's because of women like her that we have an equal suffrage clause in our state constitution that was ratified in 1895. And then a year later, Idaho actually added an amendment to their state constitution, granting equal suffrage under the law. Additional outcomes of these advocacy efforts in both Utah and Idaho was that women could now hold public office for the first time. The first year that Utah was a state, Martha Hughes Cannon was elected as the first female state senator in the nation here in Utah. The Zions Bank features Martha as well, as you can see there. And actually a statue of Martha will soon be placed in our US Capitol as part of National Statuary Hall. She was a doctor, a suffragist, a public speaker, a community health advocate. She helped to create our first state board of health, in addition to all of her groundbreaking political career. Sui Ling asked that I also mention briefly where we've come as far as having women in our legislature, since Rebecca isn't able to join us today. That same year that Martha Hughes Cannon was elected as the first female state senator, we had 2 other women who were elected to the state House of Representatives. And then that next year, Idaho actually elected 3 women to their House of Representatives as well. And within that first 25 years, up until the passage of the 19th Amendment, Utah had about 19 women that were elected to state offices, right, to either the House or the Senate. And then we also had over 140 women elected to county-wide offices in this same time period, which, remember, this is before the 19th Amendment. Many women across the nation still did not even have access to vote. So it really was the West that was leading the way in this expansion of female political participation. If we fast forward way fast to today, over that course from 1896 with Martha Hughes Cannon to today, we've elected only 30 female, just over 30 state senators from Utah. The list of state representatives is much higher. I believe it's around 180. In this 2023 legislative session, there were 26 women serving in both the House and the Senate from Utah, which is around 25%. And currently in Idaho, they're hovering around 30% of their state legislature are women. From Utah, only 4 have ever been elected to serve at the federal level, all serving in Congress. And to date, no woman has ever been elected to the US Senate from Utah. So we've got a ways to go if reaching parity in our state legislative body is a target we want to reach. But there are many examples of female leaders in the past who have opened doors and pioneered ways that we can all participate in this political process. Just kind of as wrapping up, I know we have lots of people that we want to hear from today. After statehood, when women were holding political office way back with Martha Hughes Cannon, many women in the West continued to work alongside national groups to get the 19th Amendment passed, which eventually it did in 1920. But again, I need to point out that equal suffrage didn't always mean the same thing as suffrage equity or equitable suffrage, right? Not all women living in Utah were voting in 1870 or voting and running for office in 1896 or even in 1920. But there were women in the West, women in the Zions Bank mural that continued to advocate for and be an activist for opening doors for women and men in their communities. That work continues on to this day, right? That's the legacy of leadership that we're following. And my fellow panelists have much more to share about this. If you want more information about the stories that I've shared today, as well as many, many other stories of Utah women, please visit Better Days website, utahwomenshistory.org. And make sure to share these stories with the women and the men, the girls and the boys in your life, because we want our girls to grow up knowing that this is their legacy of leadership, but just as importantly, we want the boys to also grow up knowing that women in the West have led the way. So I believe it's probably more than time for me to pass the mic.
Thank you so much, Tiffany, for schooling us all here today. Just one quick follow-up question on the note of politics, since that is a personal passion of mine. For those of you who come from political families or love talking politics at the kitchen table, I've heard through the grapevine an interesting story about Martha Hughes Cannon and her husband. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so that election of 1896 was a crowded race, and Martha was on the Democratic ticket and her husband, Angus, was on the Republican ticket. They ran against each other in that election. And Martha was victorious. The newspapers reported that she indeed was the better man for the job.
Love that so much. So we need more women running against their husbands. Just tagging that in there. Okay, so moving on. Unfortunately, our dear friend and colleague Rebecca Chavez Hoke is unable to join us today, but we absolutely wanted to acknowledge her. Especially note that she is one of the women leaders depicted in the Utah Women 2020 mural. Rebecca Chavez Hoke is a former state representative who served in the Utah House representing District 24 for 10 years. She remains a powerful voice on Capitol Hill in the business community, the education space, and in a myriad of women's leadership circles. Rebecca and I serve on, well, we have a common passion, women in politics. We both serve on the Utah Women Runs Advisory Board, working to carry out its mission to recruit and train women to run for public office. So check us out there. She also founded Kaleidoscope, which is an annual gathering that creates space for women of color and candidates of all gender identities to discuss the unique challenges they face in their political pursuits. She's an overall visionary leader, community champion, friend, and dedicated advocate for women, and we are honored to have her among us, continuing to make history in our community. So Rebecca, I hope you are listening and watching today. We miss you. All right, I want to bring in Tamu Smith, who is another dear friend and sister in Zion of mine, most notably the co-chair of Sisters in Zion, a presenter for Deseret Books' Time Out for Women. Tamu is one of the most unique leaders who has found herself sitting at the intersectionality of race, gender, and faith, and so many other identities, and has been very successful in building bridges across differences, while being a powerful voice for Utah's Black community and Black women in particular. So, Tamu, we would love to hear any stories or history you would like to share about Black women and other women of color in our community.
Oh my goodness. It feels like such a grand task when you say it like that. But one of the women that I did want to highlight is Elizabeth Taylor. And she is one of the women in the mural or on the mural. I think that when I think about some of the roles and some of the shoes that I've had to fill here in Utah, that I get to fill here in the state of Utah, I think about her because even with the limited access that she had to some of the things that society offered, some of her white counterparts, like she didn't have the right to vote, she didn't have access to some of those things. And to look at what she's done with her life, or what she did with her life and what she did with her talent. I mean, she started a newspaper with her husband, and she was an activist. She was very involved in her community and making sure that her community their needs were met. I don't want to say by any means necessary, but she really, like, it was almost by any means necessary. She made sure that their voice was heard, they had a voice, and that they understood what was happening in the community. And to do that in the 1800s, to know what's happening in the Black community in the 1800s, that in and of itself was a feat in Utah, but we're talking about nationally outside of Utah, because she traveled to so many places. And I think about, just the idea of her being an activist and what that meant at that time. And just some of the shoes that we've had to fill. I mean, I think about even Zion's Bank, and I applaud Zion's Bank for what they're doing and all they've done. I applaud you, Sui, because we have opportunities to highlight women someone like me, I get an opportunity to highlight women that have walked before me, like Gloria Wilkinson, who worked at Zion's Bank, and I look at the opportunity that was given to her. I think about Sandra Hollins and all that she does in our community, also one of your coworkers at Zion's Bank. I think about Cleopatra Balfour, Betty Sawyer. I mean, the list goes on. McAdams Jones, Dr. Diane McAdams Jones. I think about women like that and the things that they do here in Utah, and they do it without being told to do it. They do it. And I think about Black women in general. I mean, Cleopatra and Princess, the things that we see a need, we feel a need. We see this need, we tell someone, hey, this needs to be filled, this needs to be done. And when it's not done, we get it done, we do it. And so those are the women that I grew up seeing. Those are the women those are my counterparts in a lot of ways. I mean, my own grandmother, she taught me how to advocate for myself. She taught me how to build community around me. And she taught me how to be a voice at the table. And I think oftentimes I have opportunities to sit in rooms. And when I'm sitting in those rooms, and this is what I would like to challenge some of my, counterparts here on this program today, is when you're sitting in rooms and you're sitting at tables and decisions are being made, look around, see who's not at the table. And the next time you're there, invite them in. And so a lot of times that is how I've gotten to be at tables like today. Thank you, Sui, for inviting me and making a place for me at this table. A lot of times we've had to, I just look at things that get done in the community. I look at some of the things that, Representative Hollins has passed since she's been in office. And just to know that there's someone looking out for me, my curly hair self, for my daughter, for my sons, and somebody that says, hey, these are different, these are unique circumstances for this unique group of kids, and we have to make space for that. And so I've been really appreciative for the women who have come before me, especially the Black women in Utah, because it's not easy to be a Black woman here. It's not easy to be a woman of color here sometimes. And I'm grateful for those people that have made space and for me and for those that look like me and have created a path that I know that I have a direction in which to follow. So for that, I am grateful. And I think of Miss Elizabeth Taylor, and I think of how difficult it was and how easy it would have been for her to give up. And it would have meant nothing to anyone, but it means something to me sitting here in front of you all in 2023. So for women like her, I just applaud them. And I think there's so many other women, Jane Elizabeth Manning James. I mean, I really could go on, but this is a joint opportunity to highlight women in the state of Utah. So that is what I will leave it at. Shout out to Amanda Chambers also, and also to Martha Flake. So there's that. Look up those names, guys.
Ladies and gentlemen, this is my friend, Tamu Smith, and give her the microphone. She will spend her entire time acknowledging other women. Thank you so much, sis. You play an integral role in building inclusive community and culture here in the state of Utah, and we're so grateful to have you. And I am intentionally, strategically hosting this session with you and Robin Rich to make that connection between the two of you. So meet my other friend, Robin Rich. She is a highly sought after transformational tech executive who most recently served as president of Deseret News and Utah Business for the past couple of years. She is a dynamic, highly creative and innovative strategic thinker. Robin and I could talk for days on all things tech, business, media, strategy, marketing, and women. And Robin would do most of the talking, because when Robin talks, I just listen. And I had the joy of having her over for dinner at my home. And you all know how much I love to talk. The other day, where she shared a little bit about her next chapter and an exciting project she's working on related to women's history. So Robin, tell us more about that.
Yeah, I'd love to. So my background is, as Su-Ling said, is tech. And I was the first woman to come and run Deseret News. It's a subsidiary owned by the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. So it was the first woman to step into that role and run that in Deseret Utah Business as well as Church News. So that was a really interesting experience for me. And I just recently stepped away from it, but I was out to lunch with a friend of mine that just stepped down as the Chief Justice in the state of Utah. So I think that's right, Chief Justice of the state of Utah. And she was telling me about a time period that I wasn't very well versed in around the 1970s, because it's too recent of a history, but then we don't learn a lot about it. And she was telling me about just a lot of the cultural situations that were going on as she was making her decision around the and question, which is, am I going to have a career and have 5 kids, which is what she did. And so that and question, there were a lot of forces where there were narratives, especially from our faith community, frankly, around, no, there's a box for women and please stay in that box, and not necessarily about the and. And as I asked her, I'm like, I don't understand, like, what made you go forward and have that vision for yourself? And she said something that was so interesting, which Tiffany, you're gonna love. She said, well, we knew about these women from the 1920s, and we knew what they did. And so we looked at them and thought they knew about the exponent one. And they said, she said, I just thought, well, they did, so I'm just going to follow my pattern. But the minute she said that to me, I had this like sinking feeling, which was the grandmother's generation, because that's grandmothers, right now, because she's 70 something. Those stories aren't necessarily being told. They're not being told in a way that's digestible. They're being recorded. Some of them are in oral projects that are archived in our universities, because I've already gone and checked, but they're not consumable and in a relatable way to people today to say, hey, what's the pattern there if there's friction in my life from my faith community or from the community at large on what I want to go do. So I decided to go interview a bunch of these women from this time period of the early 70s, just so that everybody knows the early 70s, because I wasn't familiar with it. What was going on was civil rights. So civil rights took up the 60s and the 70s of implementing here in the state of Utah. There was still lots of friction around civil rights, because in one of the major faith communities here, that some of that didn't get sorted out until late in the 1970s. So that was going on. Civil rights was going on. A war in Vietnam was going on. There was a sexual revolution was going on. And there was also women's rights with equal rights amendment. So there was lots of like social upheaval and kind of chaos, which is kind of exciting. All these women said it was really exciting to live in that time and be in their early 20s deciding on these kind of things. But at the same time, some of the key learnings I've had is they talked a lot about I call it friction, but that there's always going to be friction. And I've after meeting with a lot of these women, I've realized I think friction is part of this world. I think that we can only walk. We're able to walk because we have friction, right? Like if we didn't have any friction here, we can't walk. But I think it's what we do with that friction and how we tackle those things. And also recognize it's part of it. There might be friction from your faith community. There might be friction from your friend group. There might be friction from your family on the things you see and feel that you want to do. One of the key things that have come up from all these women that I've interviewed is education, and access to education was key. And I think being able to broaden their worldview and expanding their horizon and knowing what was possible was so vital to them. And all of them find that that's really, really important. Another thing was when you take on that friction, it's how you react to it. So if you go into victim mode of like, wow, there's friction versus how can I put it in a box and try and solve part of it and move forward. Another thing was really fascinating was they all had this level of self-confidence in themselves. And it came from different reasons, but they had the self-confidence of, even though some people are telling me I can't do this, this is right for me. And I'm going to put that friction in a box over here and keep moving forward. And it was interesting because a lot of them had people in their lives, the one person in their lives growing up or around them that kind of allowed them to have that self-confidence and feel good about, I'm going to move forward. I'm going to be the first woman to do this. I'm going to be the first woman to do this. I'm going to, whatever it was. And I thought that was really interesting. And then they all had a complete attitude of, I'm going to solve the problems I can solve. So they were active participants in solving things. So it wasn't just that they were like, hey, there's friction. I'm going to go do my thing. I'm going to put it aside and do my thing. They actively dealt with the friction, but tried to solve any of the problems that they could. But my last one thing that I loved, and I'll move on, I'll be done, was they all asked questions. So the lives were these lives of, I'm going to ask a question. I might not have the answer. And we live in ambiguity and friction. That's really the friction. And they just kept asking questions and didn't feel bad about asking questions of like, why is it this way? Like, it doesn't make sense that it's this way. So anyway, I found so much joy. I left my job at February 1st and I've taken this time off, and it's been so amazing to learn these women's stories. It just gives me so much energy. And I just think knowing that, and Temu said this, knowing that these women went before us and have solved some of these problems and had these skill sets, it's just so empowering. And it's just so vital that we keep their stories alive and put them in ways that people can relate to them. That's it, Temu. And Suling, I am done now talking.
Oh my gosh, Robin, you're feeding my soul, feeding my soul. I'm a fan of friction, all things friction. It builds strength, resilience, endurance, all those things. And I love how these women that you're describing fed their seeds of creativity through friction, education, asking questions. That is so representative of today's panel and so many other women in our community. So thank you so much for sharing that, Robin. We're going to shift a little bit towards investing in our future. And my next two guests are doing just that. So I want to welcome Madison Lemansky, who is the Chief Operating Officer of She Place and She Money. She's a leader in the fashion industry, from modeling internationally from a young age to spending 17 years in commercial film, producing bespoke creative events, and now focusing her efforts on financial equity and opportunity right here in the state of Utah. So welcome, Madison. Madison, Jackie, and the entire She Money team have been my family over the past year, as She Money is one of Zions Bank's most recent and significant investments in women. I have become a walking commercial for She Money. All things She Money is so thrilled to introduce you to Madison. This is their spend guide, which was intentionally designed to inspire intentional spending into women-owned businesses. So it's a compilation of 70 women-owned businesses right here in the state of Utah. Half of them are women of color. And I'm just going to turn the time over to Madison to share a little bit more about that.
Thank you so much, Sui Lang, and good afternoon, everyone. You're the best advertiser we could possibly ask for to promote our first program, Spend. And like you said, this guide was developed to encourage everyone in our community to be more intentional with their spending, to support the prosperity of women, and especially women of color and queer folks. So I'll be sure to share, or Jared has kindly offered to post links in the chat as we're going along. So I'll be sure to share the She Money website here so that you can explore the digital version of the guide and consider shopping and supporting these business owners. So I'll go into more detail about our programming, but just want to say I'm so honored to be here today celebrating Women's History Month with you all, and to hear from these incredible community leaders and sit alongside you. I'm so grateful to you, Sui Lang, and of course to Scott for inviting me to join today and being such champions of our work at She Money and She Place. And thank you as well for the just continuous work that you and Scott both do in our community. It means so much to all of us. And I'm happy to share, actually, our founder, Jackie Zahner, is a history maker herself and was honored to be featured on the mural we saw earlier. And in fact, I think Jared has a close-up of Jackie on that wall. So a few fun facts about Jackie. She is a mega Wonder Woman fan. And a bit of a Wonder Woman herself. She actually, I think she has the largest collection of Wonder Woman paraphernalia in the world. So come and visit our office and see a little sample of that and get energized for your workday. But Jackie was also the first female trader and the youngest woman to become a partner at Goldman Sachs in 1996. She co-founded Women Moving Millions, which is still to this day the world's largest group of women philanthropists funding initiatives for women and girls, which has now collectively given over $1 billion toward the advancement of women and girls. And it was Jackie's longstanding passion for championing women in the financial sector and women's financial agency that led to the launch of She Place and She Money. And it was my social capital that brought me closer to Jackie and allowed me the opportunity to join her in this mission of igniting the power of Women Plus by championing their path to financial freedom. And just a note to say that we intentionally use the language Women Plus to be inclusive of all individuals who identify as women, as well as non-binary and gender fluid individuals. And of course, we always welcome the support of allies in our work. So wanted to note that quickly. So I'll explain these two entities a bit. So at She Place, we offer a Utah-based network and digital platform for folks from diverse industries and backgrounds, and it's free to join. I'd invite you all to join if you feel called to. And you'll have access to all of our events, over 1,000 community members. And our unique approach also creates the opportunity for members to build social capital in a way that goes beyond industry. It's not industry specific. It's really intentionally meant to mix up people from different life stages and backgrounds, as well as to link networks together. So we're fortunate to partner with incredible networks in Utah, such as the Women's Giving Fund, Women Who Succeed, Women's Leadership Institute, which I know a lot of you have access to. So one of our theories of change is that if we all actually coordinate our efforts and communicate and work together, our belief is that we can all be more effective in our goals. So one of our core values is connection over competition, and we really try to stand behind that every day. And this group is really based on the research of Raj Chetty, who's a professor of economics at Harvard University. And Raj Chetty shows that upward mobility is highly related to this idea of economic connectedness. And economic connectedness is created by friendship and relationships and mixing it up from people from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it's in fact how I came to be in this position today. And so the focus of She Place is really building community, which drives friendship, which drives social capital and economic connectedness. And then our consultancy and content platform, She Money, is dedicated to supporting women plus on their journey to financial wellness. And we just barely launched She Money in November. Of course, we're proud to have the support of Zions Bank and now have the state of Utah as a partner in our work. And our big why behind all of this is that, you know, while our direct experience of Utah women is that we are driven, successful, innovative people, unfortunately, the data shows that we're the worst place in the country when it comes to women's equality. And according to Wallet Hub, we've been ranked the worst place, unfortunately, now 5 years in a row. And Zions Bank actually commissioned the Utah Women in Leadership Project to dive deeper and analyze the various indicators that ranked us at the bottom of this study. And I believe Jared posted that as well, if you all would like to dive deeper, since we're short on time here. But the data shows that Utah is near the bottom of the barrel on income disparity. And it's important to name that, unfortunately, these disparities are much more dramatic for women of color in our state. Utah has high income disparity with less than 6% of Utah women making over $100,000 annually. We have a disparity in share of executive positions, rates of entrepreneurship, math scores, and we're 50th in the nation for women's advanced higher education attainment. And all of these factors really deeply affect the state of financial equity in our state. So our theory of change is that financial wellness has the ability to be one of the most significant leverage points to make a difference in women's lives. You know, financial abundance and health can afford easier access to higher education, a therapist, exercise classes, Pilates is expensive, freedom to leave a relationship if needed, or the privilege to rest or retire when you're ready. So while we know money cannot solve every problem, we like to say at She Money that having more abundant financial resources can almost always help. So that's why we're developing content and programming in partnership with Zions Bank on money-related topics. And we hope to improve the financial well-being for women plus in our state by providing these events and resources to support you along your journey. So I'd love to invite you all to join us to our next She Money workshop, which will take place on Wednesday, April 19th. We're diving into furthering your financial well-being, and we'll provide more specific topics that people can opt into, such as exploring debt and credit, investing 101, and even advanced investing. So please follow the link to join us if you can. We've also created a discount code for everyone on this call, 150 years in celebration of Zions Bank 150th anniversary. So we hope to join you there or see you on the network. And please reach out to me if you'd like to discuss anything further or have feedback or thoughts on what would be most supportive to you in your own financial journey.
Thank you so much, Madison. Thank you for sharing the information about the next event and the discount code. We are so grateful for the work you're doing there and the community that you guys are building through She Place and She Money. With no longer further ado, I'd like to welcome Master Sergeant Shawan Moses to the conversation. First of all, thank you so much for your 17 years of military service in the United States Air Force. Let's hear it for Master Sergeant Shawan Moses. Thank you so much. You currently serve as A1 Deputy Director of the 366 Fighter Wing at Mountain Home Air Force Base in Idaho, and are also founder and CEO of the Craft Sergeant LLC, which is a woman-owned, Black-owned, and veteran-owned and minority-owned small business. So such amazing accomplishments you have made here throughout your career. And let's start with your military experience. I understand you lead diversity, equity, inclusion work in the Air Force. So tell us a little bit more about that.
Good afternoon, and thank you so much for excuse me, including me in this space and having the opportunity to speak on this panel. So as far as the diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility work that I'm doing here at Mountain Home, to something that Tamu said, is very important to me that every airman in the Air Force, from the newest person to the person, at the top of the rank structure, if you will, it's very important to me that each person can see themselves in a leadership role. And so, being that I've been in 17 years, I have a few years left. Really, I want to use the DEIA space to kind of create that change that needs to happen within our organization. Some of the things that I'm currently working on here are barrier analysis working groups. And one of them in particular is for women. It's called the Women's Initiative Team. And really the goal of the Women's Initiative Team is to kind of get after the barriers that women serving are facing. One of the things that, an example of some of the barriers that we're getting after are motherhood, right? I'm a mother. So what are the challenges that I face as a woman as far as my service and how that affects my service versus a woman that is not a mother? How does that affect her career? Does she get passed over for opportunities because she's not a mother? Does she maybe work the shifts that aren't as desirable because she's not a mother? Those types of things. But in addition to gender, right? The Air Force is largely male. It's largely Caucasian. And so one of the initiatives that we are also kind of getting into is recruitment. We're getting into the community and really engaging with high school students and with college students to show them what the Air Force has to offer to them on the enlisted side and also on the officer side, so that we can start to see that change within our ranks, and so that the Air Force will be more of a mirror of the actual American society.
Mm-hmm. Okay, you are such a gem. And speaking of social capital and connections here right on this panel, I would love to connect you with a dear friend and colleague of me and Scott Anderson's, Colonel Janice M. Carroll. She was the first Black woman to serve as installation commander for Hill Air Force Base here in the state of Utah, and is now back at the Pentagon serving as Deputy Director of Diversity and Inclusion for the Air Force. I could just see her taking you under her wing and investing everything that she has acquired over, I want to say her career is like 37 years in the Air Force, and just pouring it into you as you carry on the torch. I also want to give you an opportunity to share a little bit about your small business. Tell us a little bit about the story, how you got started, what products and services do you offer, and how can we support you?
I wish I had a cool story or a profound reason for starting a business. It really started as a hobby. And in the military, retirements, promotions, and going aways are three things that are always going to happen. And so just by nature, I'm a crafter, and I started to make things for myself. People would ask me, could I make things for retirements, promotions, gifts, really? And so I just decided to turn that into a business. I don't really know what I want to do when I grow up. So I figured, if I start something while I'm still in the military, maybe it'll transform into something that I can do full time when I transition.
I love that. And I think we're all trying to figure that out as well. But can I just tell you how many people I know that started with the hobby and it's now multi-million-dollar business?
That's what I'm hoping for.
I'm just throwing that out there to you. Think big, think big. Okay, so thank you so much, everyone, for sharing a little bit about your stories, your perspectives on women's history. Final question to our entire panel as we dive in, and then we'll dive into hopefully a couple of questions from our audience. Scott Anderson and Zions Bank's private banking division hosted Gina Davis in our founders room on Tuesday, and she shared story after story of ways in which she was championing women's representation in media, in film, in public office, in business, really in every facet of life. As an actor, she shared how people would come up to her and say, I saw you playing this character in this film, and it inspired me to pursue a career in XYZ. So what I found so fascinating was how impactful representation actually was in influencing perception, behavior, and decision-making. So I'm throwing this to the entire panel. going back to your childhood, who was that for you? What woman do you remember seeing modeling something you wanted to do? And in what ways did her example influence any decisions that you have made? Let's start with Robin.
It's funny because I listened to Gina Davis as well. And I was thinking about that. I came into tech early days. There were hardly any women. So I would say when I think of who I looked at the men and thought I can do what they're doing, like in school, like in high school. And I was like, I can do that. So I think for me, I literally looked at the men and thought, what, I can do that. And I had a dad that he had 3 daughters and he was like, you guys can be whatever you want. And so I feel like my dad was looking at men thinking, I don't understand. I can totally do that. So
Robin, you were born into friction. I can see why that whole philosophy just works for you. Let's jump to Tamu. Who comes to mind for you? And you're still on mute, sis.
Could you please repeat the question?
Oh, who, like in your childhood, what woman did you look up to? Who was the model that you saw that influenced you?
The woman that was the model was my grandmother. I mean, she was everything, but also I grew up I'm a 70s baby, grew up in the 70s, and my relatives actually were at the foundation of the Black Panther movement. And so I grew up going to Black Panther children parties or kid parties, like in the 80s and 90s, when it was kind of like the Black Panthers weren't really a big thing. And so I did get to meet, I got to meet several women that were very strong women, very fierce women. And they taught me how to speak up and advocate for myself. And I'd say the biggest person to do that was my grandmother, Susie Mae Young Thomas.
Love that so much. Let's jump to Shawan.
So not necessarily in my childhood, but definitely in my adulthood, I'm looking to my friends that are entrepreneurs and starting their businesses and being successful. Just the sheer to know people that are my age that are making moves the way that they are, it really inspires me.
Love that so much. Madison.
Well, my namesake was Daryl Hannah in Splash in the 80s, if anyone saw that. But when I realized I could not be
favor her, Madison.
When I realized I could not be a mermaid when I grew up. No, I'm just kidding. Definitely my mother. I mean, who may be on the call actually today. So hi, Mom. But yeah, she's Vicki Ellen Bloomquist is my mother's name. And she has always been such a professional woman that's just so friendly and kind to others, but was always kind of, I can't think of a better phrase than crushing it, which I hate that phrase. I have to come up with a more feminine version, but she was always just working her tail off, to lead her business. And that always inspired me growing up.
Love that.
Also throw marshmallows at the FedEx person. So she had a really playful office. Every time the FedEx person came in, everyone would throw marshmallows at them. And, that's kind of fun too. So she kept things light, which I appreciate.
Love that so much. And Tiffany.
It's funny that you mentioned Gina Davis. Like when I was a girl, I watched A League of Their Home and I wanted to be an actress when I grew up. So I wanted to be Gina Davis. But in my later years, as I have spent the last 20 years taking care of my family and haven't been building a career, and I'm re-entering. And I think our Lieutenant Governor Deidre Henderson, her going back to school and getting her degree has been really inspiring to me to pursue an advanced degree myself. And that's really influenced what I'm going to be doing in the next chapter of my life.
Love that so much. It was Jan Jackson for me. I still haven't given up on my childhood dream of being a fly girl on In Living Color if we bring that show back. So hip hop is really my true passion. Somehow I wound up working at a bank. But okay, so we are going to dive into questions from our audience. We maybe have like 2 minutes to respond to a couple of these. First one is how to make a difference after retirement and how to go about it with limited funds. Any thoughts there?
I just can say, because I keep like semi-retiring and then taking time off and then doing something else. I think limited funds, I think your time and your talents are the most important thing you can bring, and your passion to whatever your thing is, where there's so much need out there. There's so much need. So I think it's your time. It really is your time. Like that's the best time because you have you're not working, right? Like it's the best time.
Love that. Okay, and we're literally looking at 15 to 20-second answers. How do you manage criticism from your own gender? Have any of you experienced that?
I would just say that criticism comes when people are, they're either unaware, unfamiliar with, or they have their own insecurities that they're trying to work through. Or sometimes it just comes because they don't know what another person's ability is. I do think criticism can be healthy if it comes from a place of love. And so my rule of thumb is I typically do not criticize people that I don't know. If I don't know you or care about it, I just say nothing.
That's a good tip. And I do believe it is healthy if done in a loving, kind, compassionate way. Last question before we bring Scott back in. What is the biggest advancement for women that you have seen recently?
I'd say the vice president.
That is a big deal. And with that, encouraging all the women here to run for public office and consider putting your name in the hat. That's just me. Okay, we are at 12:56. I want to bring Scott back in to offer any closing remarks that you would like to share with today's panel. Scott.
Well, first of all, I just want to thank the panel, Tiffany and Madison and Robin and Schwan and Tamu. I really appreciate you being with us and sharing your thoughts. I've learned a lot and been inspired. And I want to leave with a comment that Gina Davis said to me, that her belief is, if you can see it, you can do it. And the example that all of you portray, and the example that she and others portray, it gives people the belief and the faith that they can do it. She gave the example that when Hunger Games hit the screen and everyone saw what a great archer Katniss Everdeen was, that the number of women and young girls going into archery just skyrocketed. And she also mentioned that when she was in the 2001 TV series, Commander-in-Chief on television, for which she won an Emmy for Best Actress, the percent of Americans saying that they would vote for a woman to be president again skyrocketed. So if we can all be examples to help people reach their potential, that is a great thing to do. And I want to thank the panel for what you're doing in that phrase. I've asked Jared to bring up one more time the mural. And I want to focus right in the middle of the mural at the bottom. We have this young girl. And this is the most touching part of the mural for me, because above her are 250 women, as I said, most of them older, that have had extensive careers. But here's this young girl looking up and realizing that she can do anything that she can see those 250 women do. And I think that gives me hope that we can accomplish great things in bringing about greater women equity and equality here in Utah. So thank you for joining us today as we celebrate Women's History Month. And again, thank you to our panel. And thank to you, Sue Lane, for putting this on. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much,
Sophie.
Scott. We are so grateful for your leadership, your partnership, and your allyship. I don't know if all of you know, but if you Google male allyship, picture of Scott Anderson will pop up. So I'm just telling the truth. I want to thank our amazing panelists today and all the women who have made history and continue to make history in the communities that we serve. I want to thank our audience for taking the time to join us today. I also feel inspired to acknowledge all the women in our lives who may not be what we refer to as household names. Please know you are a big name in your household. And when I think of women's history in my life, I think of my grandmother, my mother, and my daughter. I want to give a shout out to all the women who are leading in their families. The work you are doing in your home is foundational to the work we do in the workplace and in our community. We see you, we honor you, and we thank you for the valuable contributions you make to our overall health, well-being, prosperity, and growth. One voice, one story, one conversation, and one film, as Gina Davis says, can make a difference. I invite everyone watching out there today to take a moment to thank a woman for the valuable contributions she has made in your life. Acknowledge her, because you never know what a simple thank you can do. Honoring women's history and investing in our future begins with us. It begins with me. It begins with Scott, Tiffany, Rebecca, Tamu, Robin, Madison, Master Sergeant Shawan, and it begins with you. I want to close by announcing our vision for the Final Four Community Speaker Series this year. In honor of our 150th anniversary in business, the Final Four Community Speaker Series will showcase the stories of a diversity of businesses in our community, centered around the theme, honoring our history, investing in our future. And you're all invited to join us. Until then, thank you again for joining us today. On behalf of the One Zions team and our panel of community speakers, we wish you a fantastic rest of your day.
Thank you.